They've sold 120 million albums and performed in front of 34 million fans.
14 songs in, Jon Bon Jovi stopped. He walked to the lip of the Madison Square Garden stage on July 23, 2026, laid a hand flat on his chest, and told 20,000 people he could not finish.
I don't think I could do this anymore. I don't know why, but I'm okay with walking away from this because there's no way I'm dragging down the legacy.
The singer of another band was pulled out of the crowd to help him through the last song. Nobody booed. 20,000 people stood there in something close to silence, because the ones who had been to the earlier shows had already worked out what they were watching. 4 years earlier, a doctor showed Jon something inside his own throat that he still describes as dying. Had it started again? The night the room went quiet. The trouble was audible inside the very first song of the night. The power that normally sits underneath Jon Bon Jovi's voice was not there. What came out instead was thin and effortful, and it did not warm up the way a voice usually does across a set. It got worse. An off night loosens. This tightened. The band pushed through 14 songs. On a standard night of this residency, they had been playing between 20 and 23. By the time they reached Bed of Roses, Jon could no longer carry the ending, so he stepped back from the microphone and let the arena sing it for him. Before the last song of the night, he stopped and spoke to the crowd with a bluntness most performers spend their entire careers avoiding. He said he knew he was letting them down. He said that was not like him. He told them there would be one more song and that he was going to need their help because he was hurting. Then came the moment that gave the night away. Pat Monahan, the lead singer of Train, was in the building as a paying customer with no role in the show whatsoever. He was pulled backstage, walked out, and carried a large share of the vocal on "Livin' on a Prayer." Even with another professional singer taking the weight, Jon leaned on the crowd to get to the end of his own signature song. When it finished, he told the audience not to throw away their ticket stubs because he was going to figure something out. He hugged each of his bandmates one at a time. He gave the crowd a thumbs up. He walked off. The statement from his representatives landed later that night. He had been battling a sinus infection. That was true, and a sinus infection is a 2-week problem. But 2 nights earlier, on night 6, the band had quietly removed Wanted Dead or Alive and Always from the set list. 2 of their most vocally punishing songs, gone, with no announcement and no explanation. A blocked sinus does not make a band delete its own catalog. The damage traces back further than that week and further than that year. It traces back to a guitarist walking out of a hotel in Calgary in 2013. In a departure almost nobody connected to a voice at the time. Subscribe to see how that one exit started the countdown on Jon Bon Jovi's throat. The pattern. Nobody wanted to see online. The reactions split. Plenty of people called the night heartbreaking, and then, in the same breath, said they were floored by how much he had left on the stage anyway. One attendee wrote that the crowd gave the band everything, and the band gave it straight back, and that Jon was still their favorite rock star regardless. Underneath the warmth, a colder red was circulating. A commenter on Deadline, who said they had been at the notorious 2022 Indianapolis show, the performance that led more or less directly to Jon's surgery, wrote that it was deeply troubling to see the same warning signs surfacing barely 2 weeks into the comeback. In fairness, setlists change constantly on long runs, and any singer will trim a taxing song to protect a voice for the following night. The problem is, which 2 songs went, and when. They were not swapped for other demanding songs. The show simply got smaller. That is the difference between a bad night and a pattern. And the pattern here does not begin in 2026.
The guitarist who left and the voice that paid.
Calgary, 2013. The Because We Can tour was rolling through Canada, and Richie Sambora was not coming, not late, not sick, gone, hours before the doors opened, with a building already filling and a set list already printed. Sambora had been in and out of rehab for years and later explained his exit in terms of family, saying he needed to be present for his daughter. That was the story the public got, and it was a real one. Jon played the show. There was no announcement worth making, and no version of the night where he walked away from a full arena, so he went out and covered the gap himself, singing into the empty space where a second voice had stood for 30 years. Nobody in that crowd walked out asking whether it had cost him anything. The bill arrived later. What the public did not calculate was the vocal arithmetic. Sambora was not simply the lead guitarist. He was the other half of a two-voice partnership that had shaped how Bon Jovi actually sounded for 3 decades. Those harmonies were not decoration, they were structure. When he left, roughly 80 tour dates remained, and Jon played all of them. He covered his own parts and the parts Sambora had always handled. For the better part of a year, one man sang a job built for 2. Jon later told AARP magazine that it was after that tour when things started to go south, and that he could not work out whether what was happening to him was psychological or physical. By 2015, it was no longer ambiguous. Picture the shape of it from a seat halfway back on any night of those tours. The opening numbers hold. The crowd is loud enough to fill in anything thin. Then somewhere in the middle of the set, in the quiet stretch where a song leaves him alone with a held note, the sound goes breathy at the edges. The volume drops off. A pitch he has hit 10,000 times slides underneath itself, and he covers by turning the microphone toward the front rows, and 20,000 voices come back and paper over the crack, and the show keeps moving. That was the trick, night after night, for 4 years. He told the How to Fail podcast that his body had crashed out from under him, and that he had not fully registered how bad it had become. So, he did what people do when they are scared and still functioning. He tried to fix it himself. In the Hulu docuseries Thank You Good Night, he ran through the list. Lasers, acupuncture, vitamins, collagen injections, exercise. He kept touring from 2015 through 2019, walking on stage night after night, while the one instrument he could not replace kept thinning out underneath him. Then the pandemic stopped touring worldwide, and the 2-year silence that healed other singers did the opposite for him. It did not restore anything. It removed the adrenaline and the momentum that had been covering the damage, and when Bon Jovi went back out in 2022, the decline was impossible to argue with. He still might have kept arguing with it. What stopped him was one sentence from the one person he could not dismiss, the only person he would believe. After an arena show in Nashville in 2022, Jon came off stage convinced he had given the room everything. He turned to his wife, Dorothea, and told her it had gone well. She told him it was not great. She told him she had seen him be great. The two have been together since high school. They married in 1989 and have stood next to each other through every phase of a 40-year band. Jon later told People magazine that the conversation was beyond heartbreaking and devastating, and that there was nobody better placed to say it. He explained the logic on a podcast. Everyone around a rock star is either a yes man, someone on the payroll, or a fan who badly wants you to be good. All 3 of those categories are structurally incapable of telling you the truth. Dorothea, he said, was his confessional box, the only person alive who would not hand him a comfortable answer. Then look at what his mind did with it. He told people that the voice inside his head, immediately, was that it was time to retire. Not time to see a specialist. Not time to rest for a month. Retire. That reflex tells you how long he had been carrying the fear privately. Within days, he drove himself to the hospital. No assistant, no appointment booked for the following week. He got in a car alone and went. What the doctors put in front of him was worse than the story he had been telling himself. The cord that was dying. One of his vocal cords had atrophied. In the Hulu docuseries, Jon described what he was shown. Vocal cords are supposed to sit roughly parallel and roughly matched in thickness. One of his had swollen to something like the size of a thumb. The other had shrunk to the size of a pinky. Every time he sang, the strong cord was physically shoving the weak one out of the way. In his own words, the cord was dying. The doctor told him some of this was simply age, that vocal folds thin over time in everyone. But 4 decades of arena singing, 4 nights a week at full volume, had run that clock forward far faster than normal. Jon found it hard to accept. He had never smoked. He had never used drugs. He warmed up before shows and cooled down afterwards every time. He told The Independent that he had sung with Pavarotti, that he was a trained vocalist who had worked at the craft for 40 years. He had done everything correctly, and the instrument had gone anyway. The surgery he had is called medialization. The surgeon placed 2 pieces of Gore-Tex outside the vocal cords, but inside the neck, designed to push the weakened cord back into position so both sides would meet properly again. Jon called it a facelift for the vocal cords. The operation worked. That was also the easy part. What followed was a 3-year project to relearn how to use his own voice. 19 months after surgery, he still could not commit to a tour. There was a finished album waiting, and no answer to the only question that mattered. He admitted in the docuseries that he had real moments of doubt, that he would find what he called a little ray of hope, push forward on it, and get punched in the nose by a fresh setback the next day. He told the Today Show that you have to be physically, mentally, and spiritually ready, and that he was not there. In April 2024, he said something to the Sunday Times that went through the industry like a cold front. If the singing was not great, if he could not be the man he had been, then he was finished, and he was at peace with it. He compared it to a quarterback throwing his last ball. Then he delivered the line that summarized the whole fear in 6 words. He said he did not ever need to be the fat Elvis. An artist who has publicly set that condition has to be surrounded by people willing to wait for an answer that may never arrive. Every one of them had somewhere else to be. The band that refused to leave. Not one member of Bon Jovi walked during those years. Nobody quietly lined up another project. Nobody floated retirement in the press. Tico Torres stayed behind the drums. David Bryan stayed behind the keyboards. Phil X, Hugh McDonald, John Shanks, and Everett Bradley kept turning up to rehearsals as though a tour was already booked, at a point when no date existed and no one could promise one ever would. John told People magazine in June 2026 that the sacrifices each of them made were on a different level entirely. They told him they were with him, and then they proved it by showing up to every rehearsal. He said his love for them had only deepened. Even Richie Sambora, who had not shared a stage with the band since walking out in 2013, said publicly that he would come back if John recovered. He told the Allison Hagendorf show that if John got his voice back, he would go and play, that he had songs ready, and that the world needed it. 13 years after the departure that arguably started the whole chain reaction, the door was open again. In October 2025, John went on the Today Show and announced the Forever Tour, Madison Square Garden. 9 nights, all sold. Every promise he had made about never being diminished on stage was now attached to a printed schedule with dates on it. 16 days of proof. On July 7th, 2026, the house lights went down at a sold-out Madison Square Garden. No opening act. Just after 7:30, the spotlight found the stage and the band walked out. John opened with a little help from my friends, in the slow gospel arrangement Joe Cocker made famous. The choice was so pointed it was almost uncomfortable. After 4 years of silence, surgery, therapy, and doubt, that lyric was not nostalgia. It was a statement of terms. He told the crowd he had not heard a live audience in 4 years. The opening night reviews were warm, but they were not dishonest. His voice was audibly different from the Bon Jovi of the 80s. He stayed put more, holding the mic stand or playing guitar instead of covering ground. But he played 21 songs, and that number answered the physical question. He could do a full show. Over the next 7 nights, the band settled in. Fans flew in from everywhere, with at least 5 languages audible in the Garden Concourse on a given night. Then the schedule started, collecting its debt. 9 arena shows inside 3 weeks is punishing for a singer with an undamaged voice. For a 64-year-old whose vocal cords were being held in alignment by Gore-Tex implants, it was a bet. And everyone involved knew it was a bet. By night 6, Wanted Dead or Alive and Always were gone. The songs simply were not played, the running time came down, and the people who had been to more than one show noticed the shape of the evening changing around them. 2 nights later, he walked to the edge of that stage, and what he said before leaving it turned out to be harder to hear than the fact that he was leaving. The promise and the price. He told them to hold on to their ticket stubs, because he was going to work out how to reschedule. And then, standing in front of 20,000 people who had just watched him fail to finish, he told them he felt great, and that he would see them soon. Both halves of that were the same man being consistent. He has spent 40 years refusing to hand an audience anything less than everything. And he was still doing it, right up to the last sentence. In the days after, the 9th and final Garden show on July 26th was still listed, along with all 5 European stadium dates: Murrayfield in Edinburgh on August 28th, Croke Park in Dublin on August 30th, and 3 nights at Wembley in September. The cost of canceling any of them, financially and otherwise, would be enormous, and not only for the band. Tens of thousands of people have already paid for flights and hotels. which puts him back on exactly the ledge he thought the surgery had removed. In 2024, he drew a line and said he would never be the artist grinding out diminished shows out of ego or obligation. He said it plainly. He did not need to be the fat Elvis. Now, the schedule, the promise from the stage, and his own body are pulling in 3 different directions. The sinus infection is the immediate cause of what happened on July 23rd, and nothing here says otherwise. It may well be the entire cause. The counter-argument is simple and reasonable. Infections are temporary, voices recover, and one bad night after 7 good ones is not a collapse. That case is sound, and the 9th show will test it. But the man from Sayreville who opened for ZZ Top at this same building in 1983, who has sold more than 130 million records, who survived Sambora's exit, the loss of original bassist Alec John Such in June 2022, a decade of quiet vocal decline, career-threatening surgery, and 3 years of rehabilitation, told the Sunday Times that 60 is not 50, and that his greatest fear was forgetting how to sing at all. He said he would be crushed if he could never do it again. Whether the Forever Tour earns its name or becomes the closing chapter comes down to what is left inside his throat over the next few weeks. And the only person who genuinely knows is the one who stood at the edge of that stage with his hand on his chest and picked honesty over performance one more time. If this story is worth following, subscribe, because the Wembley dates will settle it one way or the other. And tell us in the comments, should Jon Bon Jovi push on through the European stadiums, or protect what is left of the voice and stop while the ending is still his to choose? Share this with someone who has been following the comeback.